The Pulse Network. It's social TV.
Hi everybody, I'm Butch Stearns, Chief Content Officer here at the Pulse Network, and alongside is Steven Saber, the CEO of the Pulse Network. And of course, we couldn't do CEO Corner without having the CEO.
And great CEOs to come on board and join us, that's for sure.
I always ask you this, I'm going to do it again. Quick reminder of what you're hoping to achieve with this show when we do it all the time, but this show in particular.
CEO Corner is about trying to learn from other people's experiences. So what can I learn as a CEO? What are the lessons I can enact today? I always talk about real life solutions to real world problems. It's things that I can make a change in my business today based on what I can pick up and what I can learn. Can I learn 5 things or even 3 things that will move my business forward as soon as I get done watching this?
And the guests that we have on this show, quite honestly, not to boast, I know are very educational for me and inspirational oftentimes. And I'm very interested in meeting our guest today because he is an entrepreneur. He is an author. He has that entrepreneurial spirit. He's built his empire, which is growing very quickly from a book he's just written. And one of the things, or several of the things that he preaches, are 3 things that all business leaders are interested in. And let me read them. Gain faster results, deepen relationships, and a stronger bottom line. What leader doesn't want to focus on all 3 of those?
Yeah, that's the what. The question is, how do I get there?
Right.
That's the challenge. And really, we've always talked here about relationships and deepening relationships and about we talk about humanizing business as if it's a concept of how do you make a business feel more human and how do you deepen your relationship with your customer. This is just such a perfect guest to talk about that issue and how you can make that really work.
The name of the company is Horsager Leadership. His name is David Horsager. David, welcome to CEO Corner.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Now, did I mispronounce your name? Is it Horsager or Horsager? I forgot.
Horsager.
Horsager, thank you very much.
No big deal.
A little bit about yourself personally. You're a Minnesota native, born and raised there. You live there now, raising your family?
That's correct. I did have a little stint where I directed an organization in Arkansas, but back in Minnesota, been here for over a decade now, running this company and researching and speaking and consulting on the bottom line impact of trust.
Tell us about your company, Horsager Leadership, and tell us about your book.
Okay, the mission of the company is to develop trusted leaders and organizations. When we do that, we feel like we've helped people the most. We've helped them have, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but we believe the single uniqueness of the greatest leaders and organizations of all time is trust. We believe that a lack of trust is your biggest expense. So we help people become more trusted. We know that people, for the trusted brand, people will pay more, come back, tell others. The trusted leader gets followed. The trusted salesperson gets bought from. If people ought to be about any one thing, they ought to be about becoming most trusted by being trustworthy. So the book started the research, really had the epiphany for the book in 2003. I was at a conference working with a company in Tucson, I believe it was. I'm at the Lowe's Resort. I'm looking up at the stars. My wife is with me for that little while. And I just started talking to her that evening. I said, I think the issue and the challenges and the problems that these companies are having is not the problem that they think they are. It's actually a trust problem. So I started intuitively in 2003, really start to think about trust. Then I started the research on it, did all my graduate research on trust. And now we do, case studies and continue to do research out of Horsager Leadership on fundamentally 2 things. One, I started the research back in my grad work with how trust, does it really affect the bottom line like I think it does? Does trust really affect costs and attrition and all those productivity and efficiencies and effectiveness like I think it does? Turns out that's true. There's nothing that affects costs and revenue more than trust. Secondly, then I wanted to say, how does someone build it? How does an organization build it? How does a brand build it? And that's where the 8-pillar framework came from. Is it just so simple like people think? Is it just honesty? Is it just, integrity? Turns out that it's not. It's all 8 of these, now we call them pillars, to gaining the trust edge or this advantage of being trusted, but it's all 8. It's not just honesty, not just this or that. So we continue to do we believe fundamentally it's the single uniqueness of the greatest leaders, organizations, brands, CEOs, moms, dads, teachers of all time. How do we do it? This specific, teachable, 8-pillar framework, we've seen people have said it saved our marriage. On the other side, people have said it tripled their sales. We don't care what it does. We know it makes people and organizations better. That's what we're about. And that's, of course, what the Trust Edge is about.
So, Dave, let's dig into this. Before we go into the 8 pillars, I really want to push you on this because we always talk about quantifiable measures, and you're talking about results that are truly quantifiable. Trust is, everyone would say that's a qualitative issue, right? I mean, if they trust me, they feel better. If they have trust, it's a good thing. It feels right. But I'm a CEO. I'm a CFO here. Yeah. My CFO can't measure it. How am I going to decide to spend money on something I can't measure?
Let me tell you, number one, some of what people think are soft skills are more measurable than you think, and just because you say that doesn't mean you shouldn't work on them. However, trust is absolutely measurable. Let's just think of it this way for a moment. Just to simplify it, if you think trust is just a soft skill, ask Tiger Woods. One breach of trust, and he will tell you, or 27 breaches of trust. And he lost millions in weeks, hundreds of millions by now in endorsements. Penn State is projected to lose $1 billion over the next decade because of one person's breach of trust. A supplier you trust, one call's enough. A supplier you don't trust, 50 calls and brain stress and everything later, you don't get what you wanted. We have research that shows how attrition goes up when trust goes down. And so, and it affects everything. Look, I took my kids to my university. Here's a simple example. Last year, 20 years after going to that university, I showed my kids my post office box, P.O. Box 691. It's different today. It's the same spot. It's the same color. It's the same everything, except for that little silver P.O. box has a little thumb combination lock on it. In fact, they all do. Because at some point in the last 20 years, some freshman probably did something stupid. So now every time a sophomore goes to look for that love letter, they got to flip through that little P.O. box. What's the cost? The cost is a few bucks, but the cost is more than that, is time. Your credit, every time trust goes down, you see the cost of time go up, time to market, time to where you see investment issues happen. The other thing, look at it this way if you want to make it quantifiable. A credit score. A credit score is really just a trust score. You want to quantify it, the more you're trusted by the lender, the less you pay over the course of the loan. There's a great story in the book. I mean, I can go on. I can tell you stories and research to this end of when trust went up, costs went down. Think of a little, a vegetable stand where people can just make their own change and pay what they owe. What happens? When you can create that trust environment, all of a sudden you don't have the cost of a person having to be there. All of a sudden time goes down because they can just make their own change, don't have lines. There's a great story on that in the book and how every time trust goes up, costs go down. This doesn't mean I believe we should trust everyone. I've been ripped off like you have. It just means where you create an environment of trust, where you become a trusted leader, where you create a trusted brand, every time costs go down, efficiencies go up, productivity goes up. Page 20 of the book has a great infographic on that, just where the great things that happen when just a little bit of trust goes up just a little bit.
But let's talk, I mean, so that we had a CEO on here a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, well, I trust my employees. I don't track vacation time. I don't track time off. They do what they want to do. And, I got emails back that said that's great for him, but I've been burnt by that. I tried that, and I got taken, and so I had to implement a policy. I had to get strict. I had to draw the line. What do you tell people? Say, look, Dave, I've been burnt. Sure. I wanted to trust, and I don't trust anymore.
Absolutely. I've been burned too. I'm skeptical for good reason. I say it all. Skepticism is the opposite of trust. I once bought a company early on, lost $70,000 in 2 weeks because the guy didn't tell me the truth about it. I don't trust that flight to be on time because I've had experience. I don't trust that boy with my daughter because I've been a boy. I mean, all kinds of things, right? So there's good reasons we don't trust. So most of my work, even though I talk a whole chapter on how do you rebuild trust, most of it is, and how you give out. There's another chapter on how much you entrust others, and you have to do that with wisdom, and you have to do that with discernment, and you do that in correct ways. Some people don't do enough of it. Some people don't look realistically at the risks, and they trust everyone, and they get burned. And some people don't trust anyone, and they're burned in micromanagement. But the biggest part of my work isn't so much on that. I agree. There's reason for skepticism. Even in my office, I suppose it would be cheaper if I had virtual people, but I love that we all come together, not only for the accountability, but for the teamness but there is a piece of accountability. We know each other's working. I know my staff is working. Right. I like to feel, but let me tell you, the biggest part of the work isn't so much about how much we should trust them or not. The most important part of the work is how do we become most trusted? How do we create teams that are most trusted? And let me tell you, when you do, it starts with the CEO, it starts with the leader, and it starts with the way the leadership works and the framework that they put in place. When they do that, people tend to trust them more. When the people trust them more, they act more trusted and create more productive, efficient environments. So I want to push people right away that want to think about, oh, I've been burned by that or this. You got to be discerning. Now let's talk about you. How are you going to run a trust edge company, we call it? How are you going to become most trusted and as a leader? And how are you going to create the most trusted brand? Let's do that, because that's what I think is most important for them. It doesn't mean I don't think you should ever be skeptical.
So now let's say that I'm now a convinced skeptic, but now my issue is this. This is the other question we get a lot of. I run an industry where nobody trusts anybody. I sell cars for a living. I own dealerships. There are certain industries where trust is where the entire industry is built on the fact that trust can't exist. That trust is what do you tell those people?
Well, I don't know if it's that trust can't exist, because even in car sales and even for attorneys, even for mortgage brokers, the low trust environments or industries right now, if you look at the Edelman research, the biggest piece of research on the topic every year to year, the Edelman Trust Barometer, you're looking at, yes, nurses are more trusted and firefighters are more trusted, and look at who's low. But even in those, let me tell you from the research, even in, let's say, used car salesmen, mortgage brokers, and politicians, the most trusted have the greatest impact and the greatest bottom line. Okay, every single time. Even if I don't agree with certain elections, let's say we just had an election here in America, and whether or not I agree with anything, it's always a trust issue. Outside of the electorate, the most people that voted most trusted that person, whoever in any race, to do the best for them. It was a trust issue. Now, that's the situation. And how do they build the trust? Generally, it's these 8 pillars. The person that's most trusted is better at these 8 pillars. And so by the way, a car salesman can use it, and I guarantee they'll increase their sales. A politician can use it, and I guarantee they'll get more votes and make a bigger impact. A politician, any of those low trust arenas can use the same 8-pillar framework, and we see them increase sales, deepen relationships, and have a stronger bottom line every single time.
We're talking to David Horsager. He is the leader of Horsager Leadership. He's also the author of The Trust Edge, which currently right now is on the Wall Street Journal's #2 on the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list. It's an interesting story, a book he wrote a while ago that then got a second life and is now receiving incredible reviews. David, the question I want to ask you is about humanization from a business standpoint. And think about that for a second, because Stephen, we talk about this a lot. You've worked very hard at building our organization that internally within these walls, that you're going to be very demanding of us, but you want to build a relationship of trust, both that you trust us and we trust you. One of our partners, our fundamental partners, Chris Brogan, wrote a book called Trust Agents. And in his book, the fundamental thing that he talks about is humanizing your relationships with people. And therefore, when you do that the right way, you build off the strength of those relationships. And once you have trust, everything else follows. I guess, again, going back to the question, David, you believe fundamentally in that also, but how do you humanize a business? Where do you start to do that? You're going to go right to the 8 pillars, aren't you?
Well, I would definitely do that, and I'm holding off just because you want me to. But that's where the answer is. But let me say this: the more human you make it, I mean, look, I trust this. The epic research out of Harvard said this. It was it was epic, and it was also a little rubbing in our kind of socially correct academia world, because here Putnam's research out of Harvard said, you know what, people are twice as trusting in the most homogenous settings. And in that research, it was white on white neighborhoods,
right.
African American on African American research neighborhoods, mostly that were researched. Now, I think of diversity as much bigger than that. I can be more like an African American that's had certain experiences than maybe somebody else. I don't think it's all a color thing. I think we can have diversity of minds and thoughts. I grew up on a farm. There's so many ways we're diverse. But in that research, they said, you know what? They're half as trusting of others if they're less homogenous, in the least homogenous areas. So there is something that happens when we get to know each other, when we connect, when we have less fear that that person is so much different than us, then our trust does tend to go up. And of course that helps. So basically, trust, what you're saying is obviously true. Trust comes back to be fundamentally about relationships. Look, people trust is much more important than brand trust. It's much deeper than brand trust. I don't trust American Family Insurance, but I do trust Jim Knapp. And as long as Jim is at American Family, I'm going to trust them. But if he goes somewhere else, it's Jim that I trust, not so much American Family. And this is the same. Banks, if people would learn this, they'd say, you've got to create organizations like this where people trust people. That's where it starts. And by the way, one person can ruin a whole brand. You go to the bank, and if the treats you that way, but then the loan officer treats you that way, if they've been off brand, they've lost trust. If the teller and the president all treat you the same.
So let's get to these 8 pillars, because I don't want to run out of time, and I'm a believer. Now tell me, how do I actually do this? How do I actually make this happen?
8 pillars for the most trusted leaders and organizations. They are this, and you might have to wrap me up or say I can say so much about each of them, but number 1 pillar is clarity. Not number one in order, not in importance necessarily. We found they had to have all 8, and the final one, if any of them, is the king of the pillars. But the first pillar is clarity. People trust the clear, and they mistrust or distrust the ambiguous. So many companies think they're clear. So many leaders think they're clear. So many managers think they're clear. Many managers are like I was. I tell my staff what to do. I wouldn't get what I wanted. I would be frustrated at them. And the truth is, when I got absolutely clear about what I wanted, they started to give what I wanted to me. Whose fault was it? Mine. People trust. They trust the clear, and they mistrust or distrust the ambiguous, whether that is in vision, which many people don't know the vision, whether if they've created all the great vision, but it's so unclear and it's so inconsistently shared that it's not trusted. There's for the salesperson, being absolutely clear about the benefits is the critical piece. So you can find 3 different areas of clarity. Number 2 is compassion. People trust those that think beyond themselves. This is that the element that you're talking about as far as the human element, and it's so we trust those that think beyond themselves. We trust number 1 person most people trust, mom, because she stayed up late. She put that ugly wound. She sometimes put her career on hold. Yes, there's some crazies on daytime TV, but mom was trusted because she had this ability to think beyond herself. We need to be a little bit more like mom often. The next pillar is character. People intuitively get this pillar to do. Those that had this pillar, by the way, those leaders and organizations, did what needed to be done when it needed to be done, whether they felt like it or not. They did what's right over what's easy. And we can talk a lot about this. By the way, people think that you have to hire on this, but you can create cultures, not end-run type cultures, but cultures where character is motivated, esteemed, aligned, and promoted. And so it's worth thinking about, again, if you really are promoting this, the thing of doing what's right over what's easier, doing what you ought to do instead of what you feel like doing. This is a huge problem in America. Look what's happened. Parents my age, in their 40s, around 40 or something, tell their kids on Friday night, when their kids go out maybe with friends for the weekend, what do parents in America say today? Parents in America say, have fun, kids, have fun. But you know what? You find someone 30 years older than me, they never said that. They never said to their kids, have fun. They said, you be good. You got the family name. You better be good. And you know what? They promoted being good. I'm not saying it's bad to have fun. I'm saying we've got to create a culture. I read an article the other day about the addictions in America. What are the addictions? Obesity, debt, and pleasure or entertainment. We got to get away from these addictions and start to provide something valuable and think beyond ourselves, have character that doesn't just do what we feel like and what we ought to do. Right. Next, competency. This speaks to the idea, of course, that I might trust, you might have great compassion, you might have great character, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the competency at what I'm asking you to do, then we've got a problem. I might trust, let's say, Butch, I might trust you with my kids for the weekend because of your character. I'm not going to give me a root canal. So next pillar is commitment. Fascinating. I love to talk about this one. I'm not going to take a lot of time on it, but there's a reason that Harley Davidson, if you put $1 in on the 25 years before 2007, you would have received almost $18,000 out, because they committed to their #1 buyer, the yuppies that want to look like a renegade on the weekend, and they committed to quality in a new way. But what are the brands? Apple, John Deere, American Girl doll. But it starts with you, and if we get to it at the end of the broadcast, I'll share what happened to me and how I made a 90-day commitment, how I lost 50 pounds in just a little while, and it starts with a commitment. The next pillar is connection. Those people that had the trust edge had this ability to connect and collaborate. In America, we think of independent, I did it all on my own, or we think often on the other side, codependence. I need the government to do it for me or whatever. The best, the real trusted way is interdependence. We need you, but we need you to know you need each other and are part of a bigger team. By the way, you know how there are repelling traits of people that push people away and magnetic traits? Right. I'll give you one. The one most magnetic trait of all time. Magnetic trait, in Prager research, it was also the trait of the happiest people in the world. This trait is not charisma. We want to throw up around certain charismatic politicians or whatever. #1 trait of the most magnetic people in the world is gratitude. Gratitude. If you want to build something into your family and your life and your culture, look, people with gratitude, they aren't entitled, they aren't complainers, they aren't gossips. Okay? The next pillar is contribution. Contribution speaks to the idea that at the end of the day, I need to see results. You can be all clear, compassionate, character, and all this stuff, but if you don't see the results I asked for or expected, I'm not going to trust you. On the other hand, you can get me results but not have compassion or character, like some salespeople I know, and over time I will not trust you either. That's why you need all 8. The final pillar of the greatest leaders and organizations of all time is consistency. Being the same. And by the way, I can trust you for good or bad, can't I? You're late all the time. I trust you to be late. You're on time all the time. You're this way all the time. I want to trust sameness. This is why we trust McDonald's, because they've given us, you might not even like them, but they give us the same burger. I've had the exact same burger in Frankfurt, Tokyo, and Cleveland. It might look, it might be made of something different, but it tastes the same, looks the same, smells the same. We want to create sameness in the experience at our organization, sameness in the brand, sameness in how we treat people when they're in or out of the room. Those that are the same, those that are consistent, we tend to trust.
So David, we always run out of time on this show. It always gets cut short. Your book is fascinating. Your 8 pillars of trust: clarity, compassion, character, competency, commitment, connection, contribution, and consistency. My final question to you is this: how do you practice what you preach within your own organization?
Oh, there's several ways, and let me tell you, I'm held to it. If I make a commitment, you can imagine I better keep it or I lose trust in an instant. I'm held to it accountably. How do we do it in some other ways? Let's just go to one of the pillars, clarity. We have a very clear mission statement, but more than that, we share it at the beginning of every meeting consistently. So everybody in our organization, our frontline interns, can share the values of our company, can share the mission of our company, can share the absolute vision of our company, and can share the top 3 priorities we are about right now. They all know it. Anybody can share. What are the top 3 priorities? Anybody can share the mission to develop trusted leaders and organizations. Anybody can share the values. They all know it. Why? Not because it's just clear. Not just because we're passionate about it, but because we share it so consistently. If people don't share their mission, vision, and top priorities every 21 days, who's going to know them? That's what it's like in most organizations I work with. Nobody knows it, and so they don't do the daily things differently. They also know, my assistant, one of my staff guys, he comes in, he just came in a little bit ago, but every day this guy comes in and tells me, here's my top 3 priorities for the day. Here's my top 3 priorities for the day. I have kids right out of college. One of them recently, he was worth $250,000 in just a couple months. Why? Because he does the little most important things every day. How does he do that? Because he's absolutely clear on them. Most people are so squelched because they're not clear on the most important things to do in a day, and that is unmotivating, demotivating, if that's a word, and it certainly doesn't build trust.
So then, David, let me ask you a question, though. So now I take over an organization that's filled with a lack of trust. It's filled with a distrusting organization, distrusting customers. It's and I'm a turnaround guy, or I'm somebody who's got to get started in this thing. Where do I begin? I mean, so let's say that let me say even easier. I've been running this company for a while. I just picked up your book. I believe in what you say. I want to be clear. I want to be consistent. I want to have character. But how do I get them to buy into this? How do I get everybody to believe me?
Well, I'll tell you the first thing. One idea, and there are several, but the first idea is the only way to rebuild trust, which we're talking about in leadership. And I sit on several boards, and I'm unfortunately, I'm the, well, not unfortunately, but I'm the board development guy or the board strategy guy. I fly to all their board meetings with this one board that is so dysfunctional, they're killing their organization. They're so infected. But what do you need to do? Number one, the only way to rebuild trust is to make and keep a commitment. You've got to start by don't make so many commitments. Don't say all that stuff. Just make ones you're going to keep. Just make the ones you're going to keep, and you've got to keep it. I can't trust you unless you make and keep commitments. Most people think it's a genuine apology, but people apologize all the time. They say they're sorry all the time. I talked to a CEO from the Netherlands. I said, what do you see as the difference in America? He said, well, the one thing I noticed is you got a bunch of lying apologizers. They all say they're sorry and they don't mean it. Say they're sorry, they're late, and they're so what we need a genuine apology, but you got to start. You personally, as the leader, need to make and keep your commitments. Then you go through the pillars, and look at BP's doing it and several others that we never thought would even be around today, but they've done the little things that make the big difference. There's a big part there in the book, the little things that make the big difference. Figuring that's one idea for you.
So what? I want people to leave with something. I mean, the eight pillars I get. How do I get started? But where can I go to find out more? Where is the best? I mean, read the book, obviously. What else can I do to learn about this? What else can I do to sort of get not only me but my organization to really consume and really make this a part of what I'm all about?
It's a great place. We of course help organizations triple sales and grow their organization and build deeper relationships by consulting and training organizations and helping implement what we call a trust edge culture. And so we love to do that. And we're passionate about that. That's the only thing we do. Everything we do is about building a trust edge person or a trust edge culture. So you can go to thetrustedge.com. You can go to davidhorsager.com for your team today. By the way, if you buy the book on Amazon or anywhere, then just email us. You can do it to Ryan, R-Y-A-N, at thetrustedge.com, and just let us know you bought the book. It's totally a trust deal, and we'll give everybody in your organization, everybody that bought it because of you, just put in the little subject line, just put Butch and Steven, and we will send them a password that gets them into an area that gives you about $1,000 worth of resources. So it gives 12 videos that they can use to share with their team, and it gives a bunch of other resources. Just put Butch and Steven in the subject line, write an email to Ryan at davidhorsager.com or Ryan at thetrustedge.com, and we'll send you that to get started. That will all be free. You won't get on any list. You won't get asked for any more stuff. That's a good place to start. Gives you top tips to build trust as an organization, as a leader, and that kind of thing. Obviously, I think the book is worth it as a starting point, and then we certainly want to go deeper if you really want to see change in your organization and see more sales and deeper relationships and all that.
All right, David, one final quickie on the way out. I'm one of those organizations that you talked about at the beginning that thinks I have trust, or I'm not sure. How do I find out? What's the one question I ask within my walls, or one litmus test I do to find out the level of trust I think I have, that I actually have?
Signs. I really am big on the methodology of appreciative inquiry, where you ask, what did you like best about working with us? You got to go outside the walls if you really want to know. Of course, you can tell by how many sales you have. Of course, you can tell by how loyal customers are. If they go to you and then they go somewhere else, they don't trust you all that much. So you can look at a lot of different factors. But the thing I would do as a CEO is I would ask my team, even personally, hey, what can I do to help you do your job better? Individually, I would ask every one of them, if you have 1,000 reports or 10 reports, I would start by asking them, what can I do to help you do your job better? And is there anything that's keeping you from doing your very best right here today? That's individual with your team, but you got to inquire of your clients and customers if you want to know the truth there. And you can find it You can find it by looking at the financial trend in your organization. You can find it by bringing in a consultant or somebody to go use appreciative inquiry or some other methodology to do that. But you can find it. Now, we also have a 360 assessment. That's the best way to find out the truth because it's totally confidential and people will tell you there. And people are afraid of 360s, which is crazy because, of course, everybody else is talking about it that way behind your back. So you might as well know, too.
David, continued success with your book. It's called The Trust Edge, and with your company. Thanks for your time on CEO Corner.
Thanks for your great work to leading the leaders, and really appreciate you getting truth out all over the place. And thanks for the time today.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, David. So just a minute to wrap up here, Stephen. It's fascinating. I mean, he does practice what he preaches. It's all based on trust, and it's one of those things, you mentioned humanization, that we might take for granted that we think is so simple.
Well, and what I love the 8 pillars because when when someone says build trust, you're sort of saying to yourself, okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting, sure, whatever. But as you break down the pillars and you say, okay, let's be clear on what our products and services and vision are. Let's show character in how we represent ourselves. Let's make sure we build a connection with our customers. So as you start to get into those become true things that you can build an organization around. So it's more than when you just say trust, it just sounds... It may sound too fluffy for some people, it may sound too esoteric, but reality is when you start to get into those pillars, you actually, and honestly, those could be 8 shows in and of themselves, because each one of those, there's a lot to dig into. But if you just simply thought about those, and I think the way to figure it out as a CEO is put those on a piece of paper, write 1 to 5 on there and say, what's my score? How would I score myself and my organization on these 8 pillars? And I think you'd be surprised. And if you then pass it around to your executive team and ask them the same question, I think you'd be shocked what you'd see, but it would also tell you where to focus.
Well, and you asked the question, and I think he was very thorough and very specific about it. Trust is measurable.
I think it's measurable, and I think he's right. You can actually draw a connection to repeat customer, to loss of business, to connection through rough times. We always say that the way to hold on to a customer in rough times is to be able to have a trusting relationship beforehand that you can help to weather the storm. And in a lot of ways, that's what he's talking about.
The name of the book is The Trust Edge. His name is David Horsager. You can find him at davidhorsager.com. You can find the book on the Wall Street Journal's best-selling list and other places. Check it out. He's Steven Saber. I'm Butch Stearns. Thanks for being a part of CEO Corner.